She knocked because there was no other choice. He opened the door because silence had become his only companion. Yet fate, restless and cruel, had written a different story. Eliza and Jonas were strangers bound by grief until peril made them something else. More than survivors. More than protectors. A family. The wind howled through the valley like a wounded creature. Snow tore sideways, devouring the fading light, swallowing all that stood in its way. No paths, no signs, only endless white. Eliza Cooper drew her shawl tighter, though the worn wool did little against the cold gnawing at her bones. Beside her, 3 small figures trudged on, heads bowed, faces hidden beneath frayed scarves and patched hats. Nathan, the eldest at 10, clenched his jaw tight, refusing to show fear. Laya, barely 8, held onto his arm, her steps faltering with every breath. And Ben, sweet little Ben, only 5, whimpered softly, his frozen mittens gripping his mother's skirt. Eliza's legs ached. Her lips split each time she whispered for them to keep moving. She didn't know how much farther they could go, or if she could, but she wouldn't stop. Not after Matthew. Not after his last words before riding away, leaving them at Bitter Hollow with half a sack of flour and a lie. "You'll figure it out, Eliza. You always do." She could still hear his voice, still taste the betrayal when she realized he wasn't coming back. So she pressed on, through the storm, through the ache, through the empty quiet, until she saw it. A light, flickering faintly through the curtain of snow half-veiled by swaying pines. A cabin. Eliza nearly fell to her knees, but forced herself upright. "Come on," she whispered hoarsely to the children. "Just a bit more." They stumbled the last stretch together, collapsing at the door. Eliza's hand, numb and trembling, knocked once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. She hit it again, harder. Her throat tore as she tried to call out, but only a raw rasp escaped. Then finally the door creaked open. A man filled the doorway, backlit by firelight. Broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face chiseled and lined, beard dusted with gray. But it was his eyes, cold, tired, empty, that struck her. For a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. 3 children clung to their mother's skirt, shaking. The man's jaw flexed. He stepped aside. "Get in." Eliza didn't hesitate. She ushered the children through, dragging Ben across the threshold. The door shut hard behind them, silencing the storm. Warmth crashed over them. The hearth crackled alive. The faint scent of pine and smoke lingered in the air. The man moved quickly, dragging chairs nearer the fire. "Sit, warm yourselves." Eliza obeyed, unwrapping scarves and peeling frozen coats from her children's small bodies. Nathan helped Laya, rubbing her arms, while Ben buried his face in Eliza's lap. The man disappeared into another room and returned moments later with thick blankets and a kettle. "Drink," he said, pouring steaming water into chipped mugs. "Ain't much, but it beats the cold." Eliza accepted gratefully, curling numb fingers around the warmth as she studied him. He moved like a man long used to silence, each step deliberate, each breath heavy with solitude. From the hard line of his jaw to the echo of his boots against the floorboards, everything about him spoke of a life spent alone, yet he hadn't turned them away. "Thank you," Eliza whispered, her voice frayed from wind and fear. He grunted, stirred the fire, sending sparks darting up the chimney. "You come far?" he asked at last, his tone even. Eliza hesitated, but something in his steady calm, his lack of demand, made her answer. 3 days, she murmured. "East of Bitter Hollow. Wagon broke, walked the rest." He didn't flinch. "Why?" The single word struck harder than she expected. She swallowed, glancing toward her children huddled near the fire, already half asleep. "Left," she said finally. "Had to. That was enough for him." He gave a slight nod, leaning back against the table, arms crossed. "Name's Jonas Hale," he said after a pause. "Eliza Cooper," she replied softly. She gestured toward the children. "Nathan, Laya, Ben." Jonas nodded again. His expression stayed unreadable, but his gaze softened slightly as he watched Ben's small hand still clutching his mother's skirt, even in sleep. "You're safe here," Jonas said quietly. "Storm's got nowhere to go tonight." "Neither do you." Relief hit Eliza so fiercely it almost broke her, but she steadied herself. She always did. Meeting his eyes, she whispered, "Thank you." Jonas only turned back to the fire, his face lit gold in its glow. Outside, the storm clawed at the cabin walls, but inside, for the first time in a long while, Warmth and quiet held steady. Eliza and her children were safe, at least for now. Morning came slow. The storm hadn't gone, only gentled, its howl reduced to a soft hiss like a serpent coiled outside waiting for weakness. Eliza stirred first. Her back ached from sleeping upright, but her eyes went straight to the children. Nathan, Laya, and Ben still lay wrapped in borrowed quilts, cheeks flushed with heat instead of frost. Ben's hand rested over Laya's shoulder. Nathan had shifted to curl protectively around them both. They were safe. For now. Eliza rose carefully, her legs stiff, and glanced around the cabin. It was simple but tended. Tools neatly hung along one wall, a row of worn books near the door, a table scarred but clean. She found Jonas outside, standing on the porch, axe in hand, splitting wood in smooth practice swings. Snow dusted his shoulders, but he didn't seem to feel it. Eliza hesitated. Then she stepped out, pulling her shawl close against the chill. "You don't have to do all that for us," she said softly. Jonas didn't look at her. "Not doing it for you," he replied, voice flat. "Doing it for the stove. Stove don't care who's hungry, just needs wood to burn." Eliza nearly smiled. She knew the kind, men who hid kindness behind rough words and harder hands. But she didn't press. Instead, she stepped off the porch and began gathering the split logs into her arms. Jonas paused, watching her. "Could have stayed inside," he said. "I've been sitting too long," Eliza answered simply. "Feels better to move." He gave a single nod, quiet approval in his eyes. Together they worked, saying little but needing no words. By the time the woodpile stood high again, the sky had turned a pale, weary silver. Jonas jerked his chin toward the door. Coffee's probably still warm. Inside, the children were stirring. Nathan yawned and stretched. Laya rubbed the sleep from her eyes, and Ben peeked out from under a quilt, cautious but curious. Jonas poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, black, bitter, steaming. Eliza took hers with both hands, savoring the warmth that crept into her fingers. "You planning to move on when the storm breaks?" he asked quietly. Eliza hesitated. I don't know. I thought I would. Had family west, at least I thought I did. But the letters stopped coming before winter." Jonas didn't pry. He just nodded, sipping his coffee. "You ain't the first to think West holds all the answers," he murmured. "Most times you just find more questions waiting." Their eyes met across the table. For a fleeting moment, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. 2 souls left behind, both learning how to keep breathing. As the day stretched on, the children settled in. Nathan helped Jonas with the animals, hauling hay and breaking ice from the trough. Jonas showed him how to grip the axe, how to swing without wasting strength. Laya stayed inside, patching mittens beside her mother, asking quiet questions about the man who'd taken them in. Why he lived alone. Why he had no family. Ben, meanwhile, followed Jonas everywhere, chattering like a sparrow. "What's that knife for? Do bears come here? Can I have a horse someday?" Jonas answered each one, patient as stone. "No," he said once, nodding to the rifle by the door. "That's for bears. Knives are for wood or stubborn knots." By evening, something in the cabin had changed. The silence no longer pressed, it breathed. The children laughed softly near the fire. Eliza smiled as she stirred the thin stew, stealing glances at Jonas, who sat nearby, carving a small wooden bird. His hands moved slow, deliberate, shaping more than just wood. "You carve well," she said quietly. Jonas looked up. "Gives me something to do when the wind won't quit howling." Eliza watched him for a long moment. "I think," she said gently, "you're kinder than you let on." Jonas didn't smile, not exactly, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth said enough. Night fell heavy and calm. After supper, the children curled up near the hearth, already drifting to sleep. Eliza and Jonas sat at the table, the lamp casting a golden glow between them. Outside, the storm had softened, but the cold still clung to the windows. Eliza's fingers wrapped around her cup. "Thank you," she said suddenly, voice low but steady. Jonas raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For letting us stay. For not asking too many questions." He glanced toward the sleeping children, eyes distant. "Didn't seem like you needed more questions," he murmured. "Seemed like you needed rest." Something eased inside her, something that had been tight for too long. "I did," she whispered. Silence settled again, not heavy this time. Just easy. Jonas stood, stretching his broad shoulders. "Storm's breaking," he said. "Tomorrow you can head out if you still want to." Eliza gave a slow nod, yet the thought twisted her stomach. Leave and step back into a world that had battered and abandoned her, or remain. That decision could wait for another night. For the moment, they were safe. The fire held steady. For the first time in many moons, Eliza Cooper let herself harbor a small, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, safety might not be only temporary. Dawn arrived in a pale, unsure light. For the first days, there was no falling snow. The sky sat heavy and gray but clear. The storm had moved on. Jonas Hale stepped onto the porch, boots crunching on the packed snow. The air smelled of change, not merely spring forcing its way through winter's grip, but something else too. Inside, Eliza and the children were already awake. Nathan rolled quilts, eager to help. Leah sat braiding her doll's yarn hair, humming softly. Ben trailed Jonas that morning, peppering him with questions about the animals, the trees, what lay beyond the snow. It felt ordinary. Too ordinary, and Jonas did not trust ordinary. By midday, Eliza stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her skirt, her gaze fixed on the far ridge where the trail vanished into the pines. "Do you think it's safe now?" she asked quietly. Jonas didn't answer at once. He set down his axe, rubbing sweat and frost from his brow. "Safe isn't something the land hands out," he said after a beat. "But it's quiet. That matters." Eliza nodded, though doubt lingered on her face. For a while they worked together. Jonas fixed a fence rail split by the heavy snow. Eliza swept the cabin, humming as the children played near the hearth. There was a sense of settlement, of roots taking hold. And then the sound came. Hoofbeats. Jonas heard them first, the steady, unhurried clip of horses. Not frantic, not fast, only confident. He stepped from the barn, eyes narrowing on the trail. A rider broke from the tree line. Tall, lean, wrapped in a dark wool coat far too fine for these parts. Another, then a third followed. The first tipped his hat, slicked hair, and a smug smile that Jonas recognized at once. Not a drifter, not an outlaw. Something worse. A man who believed law and power belonged to him by birthright. "Afternoon," the man called, voice smooth as creek stones. Jonas said nothing. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Eliza stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, and froze when she saw them. Her face drained. "Matthew," she breathed. Jonas needed no question, he knew. The man dismounted slowly, boots sinking into slush, and peeled off his gloves with a practiced, casual cruelty. "Hello, Eliza," Matthew Crowley drawled. "Been a long road to find you." Eliza moved closer to Jonas, putting herself between Matthew and the children. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice thin but steady. Matthew's smile widened, cold and false. "Come now. No welcome for your husband? You stopped being that when you left us to die in Bitter Hollow," he said with a contemptuous tisk, shaking his head as if scolding a stubborn child. "Let's not be dramatic. I've had time to think, reflect. Clearly you and the children need proper care, structure, a man's guiding hand." Jonas stiffened, jaw hard. "This ain't your place," he said flatly. Matthew's gaze slid to Jonas, sizing him. "And you are? The man sheltering them?" He sneered with a mean chuckle. "How convenient. A widow cozying up to a stranger in the woods." Jonas did not flinch. "You left them to die." Matthew's charm snapped. His lips curled. "I did not," he snarled. "I'm here to take what's mine. I've spoken with the sheriff in Glenrock. I'm their father by blood and by law." The word law cut at Eliza. Her face crumpled. Jonas saw the fear there, not for her, but for the children. Matthew saw it too and pressed on. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said lightly, as if speaking of the weather. "You'll have tonight to say your goodbyes. But mark me, Eliza, they leave with me. Court orders don't look kindly on women who run." He swung up into the saddle, nodded once to his men, and the three rode away, leaving churned snow and a heavy silence in their wake. That night the cabin felt like a tomb of low dread. The children had heard everything. Nathan sat stiff by the hearth, forcing calm but failing. Leah clung to Eliza, whispering whether they would have to go. Ben sobbed into his sister's lap. Eliza paced, hands raw from wringing them. "What will I do?" she whispered, voice breaking. "He has the law, money. I cannot fight that." Jonas sat at the table, eyes fixed on the flames. "You don't have to face it alone," he said simply. Eliza stopped pacing, red-rimmed eyes meeting his. "What do you mean?" she asked. Jonas leaned forward, voice low and sure. "I've met men like him before. They think paper and threats make them untouchable. But this place, people here, they've seen what you are, what you've done. You kept those children alive. You built something. He's counting on scaring you into silence." He stood, shoulders squared. "But we won't be silent. Not tomorrow, not when he rides in expecting surrender." Eliza stared at him, tears clinging to her lashes. "And if he forces them to take the children?" she whispered. Jonas did not hesitate. "Then he'll have to take them from my hands," he said. The fire cracked, sending sparks into the air. For a long moment, Eliza said nothing. Then slowly she stepped closer than she had ever dared before and laid her hand lightly on Jonas's arm. "You would do that for us?" Eliza's voice trembled, barely above a whisper. Jonas looked down at her hand resting on his arm, then back up into her eyes. "For family," he said softly, "I'd do more." This time Eliza didn't cry. She only nodded once, steady, resolute. "Then we stand together." Outside, the wind hissed through the trees like an omen, but inside the cabin, two wounded hearts had drawn their line in the snow. And by morning, Matthew Crowley would learn what that meant. Morning came sharp as a blade. The sun rose pale and cold, slicing long shadows across the frozen hills. It should have felt like a fresh start, a day for thaw, for hope. But to Eliza Cooper and Jonas Hale, it felt like the silence before a storm. Matthew Crowley would return. Men like him always did. Inside, Eliza dressed her children with careful hands. Nathan's face was hard and still. Leah asked in a whisper if they'd have to go. Ben, too young to understand, clung to his mother's skirts. "You're not going anywhere," Eliza murmured, brushing Leah's hair smooth, forcing her voice to sound calm. "No matter what that man says." Outside, Jonas was already at work before dawn, splitting wood, checking his rifle, securing the cabin's door with slow, sure movements. He wasn't preparing for war, but he wasn't yielding either. By midday, the air itself seemed to hum with tension. Then it came, the sound of hooves. More than one horse this time. Eliza's breath caught. 4 riders broke from the tree line. Matthew led them, his posture easy, his smirk confident. Behind him rode Sheriff Tate, the kind of man who enforced the law only when it paid. Matthew swaggered forward like he owned the snow he walked on. "Eliza," he called, voice echoing through the clearing. "I'm here like I promised. Time to bring my children home." Eliza stepped into the doorway, spine straight though her hands shook. "They are home," she said, each word steady as stone. Matthew's smile sharpened. "Let's not make this difficult. Sheriff Tate has the papers, custody signed and sealed. I'm within my rights." Sheriff Tate unfolded a worn yellow paper, reading aloud in his flat drawl. "Eliza Cooper, you are hereby ordered to relinquish custody of the children to their father, Matthew Crowley. Failure to comply, that's enough." Jonas's voice cut through like a blade. Every head turned. He stepped forward, placing himself between Matthew and the cabin. "I know what you are, Crowley," Jonas said evenly. "A man who left his family to die in the snow. A man who treats people as property. But not here. Not anymore." Matthew's eyes went cold. "You don't have a say in this, Hale. The law does." Jonas didn't waver. "The law might not care who you are, but this town does." And then came the voices. From beyond the trees, footsteps crunched over snow. Mrs. Webb, Pastor Connor, old Doc Briggs, faces wrapped against the cold, eyes hard with purpose. Behind them, more townsfolk, people who had watched Eliza fight her way back from ruin. "We stand with her," Mrs. Webb said simply, stepping to Jonas's side. Pastor Connor nodded. She raised those children with grace when no one else would. Matthew's confidence flickered, his mask slipping. "This isn't your business," he snapped. "It is now," Jonas said, voice calm but iron steady. The sheriff shifted uneasily, eyes darting between them. "Crowley, this paper's only worth something if folks are willing to enforce it." A murmur rippled through the gathered townsfolk. Matthew's gaze swept the faces before him, the farmers, widows, the preacher, all standing shoulder to shoulder behind Jonas Hale. His jaw clenched, rage fighting the creeping shadow of defeat. "You think this is over?" he spat, voice sharp and shaking. "You think a handful of dirt farmers can stop me?" "I think," Jonas said quietly, "you're already stopped." Silence dropped heavy as snowfall. For a moment, Matthew just stood there, chest heaving. Then with a bitter curse, he snatched the papers from the sheriff's hand, crumpled them, and turned toward his horse. "This isn't the end," he shouted as he mounted up. "No," Jonas replied, his voice low but clear. "It's the beginning." Matthew's horse kicked up snow as he rode off into the gray horizon. The sheriff lingered a moment longer, His posture slumped, realizing which way justice had turned. Then he followed. The crowd slowly thinned, no cheers, no applause. Just quiet nods, soft words for Eliza, and the simple knowing that they'd stood on the right side when it mattered most. Inside the cabin, the air finally eased. Eliza stood at the window, watching the riders disappear over the ridge. Her hands trembled, not from fear this time, but from release. Jonas stepped beside her, his presence solid and warm. "He'll be back," she said softly. "Maybe," Jonas admitted, "but so will we. Every day as long as it takes." She turned to him then, meeting his eyes. For the first time, the wall she'd built began to fall. She leaned closer, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. "You didn't have to stand up for us," she whispered. "I did," Jonas said simply, his hand resting at her back. "Because you're not alone anymore." They stood together in the fading light, not savior and saved, but equals bound by something quiet and fierce. Outside, winter still clung stubbornly to the hills, but inside, where the fire burned steady and the children slept safely, warmth finally returned. And for the first time in a very long time, Eliza Cooper and Jonas Hale did not feel cold. Matthew Crowley's shadow still lingered somewhere beyond the ridge, but the worst had passed. The children were still safe. Eliza was still here, and Jonas Hale, who had endured countless winters in silence, his only company the crackle of wood and the echo of his own thoughts, was no longer alone. Spring came slow but steady. Snow receded first along the cabin's edge, trickling into rivulets that whispered beneath the porch. Green buds pierced the thawing ground, and every morning Eliza paused to watch them, her breath soft with wonder. Inside, laughter returned like a forgotten song rediscovered. Nathan worked beside Jonas now, his once clumsy hands growing sure with every nail driven and log lifted. Jonas showed him how to tie a true knot, how to sharpen a blade, how to build with patience. The boy listened, eager, soaking up each word as if it were scripture. Laya and Ben spent their days near the creek, pockets full of smooth stones and wild daisies woven into crowns. One afternoon, Jonas led them into the woods. When they came back, Laya held a tiny wooden fox, carved delicate and brave. For Ben, a whistle, simple, bright. He ran across the yard, blowing it proudly until Eliza laughed so hard she had to lean against the wall to catch her breath. That laugh stopped Jonas in his tracks the first time he heard it. It was the kind of sound that could chase ghosts from a room. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't just stand against the wind, it lived. One quiet evening, Eliza stood by the hearth, brushing flour from her palms after baking bread. Jonas sat nearby, knife in hand, pretending to focus on its edge while his gaze drifted to her again and again. The children were asleep, their soft breaths mingling with the whisper of the fire. The silence between them was warm, waiting. "They're happy here," Eliza said softly. Jonas nodded. "They should be." She hesitated, then crossed the room, sitting across from him. "But are you?" she asked, her voice barely above the crackle of flame. Jonas set his knife down, eyes steady on hers. "For a long time," he began, his tone roughened by honesty, "I thought quiet meant peace. I built this life to keep from losing more. But then you came." He nodded toward the children's room. "And I realized quiet isn't peace. Sometimes it's just empty." Eliza's breath trembled. "I never meant to stay this long," she whispered. Jonas smiled faintly. "I never meant to want you to." The words hung between them, raw and real. Eliza reached out, fingertips brushing his. "We don't have much," she murmured. Jonas turned his hand, lacing their fingers. "Got enough?" Her eyes glimmered, tears gathering. "Do you really want us here, Jonas? Not just until spring. Not just until the danger's gone. For good." He held her hand tighter. "Because of you, this place feels different. Feels alive. Feels like home again." Eliza's voice broke. "Then say it, please." Jonas looked at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Stay, Eliza," he said quietly. "Stay and make this your home." Make us your home, that was all she needed. Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely as she rose and crossed the space between them. Jonas stood, meeting her halfway. She pressed her forehead to his chest, arms winding around him, and he held her close, steady, certain and warm. Not with need. Not with fear, but with promise. The promise of mornings, filled with bread and children's laughter, Of nights carved into memory by the glow of the hearth. Of a family not found by chance but built by choice. Fought for. That night, long after the fire had dimmed and the children slept soundly, Nathan stirred. Quietly he padded out and found Jonas standing by the window, gazing over the moonlit valley. "Jonas?" the boy asked softly. Jonas turned, surprised. Nathan hesitated, scuffing his foot against the floor. "Is it okay if we call this home now?" Jonas's throat tightened. "Yeah, Nathan," he said quietly. "It's home now." Relief softened the boy's face, but before he turned away, he asked one more question, one that struck deeper than Jonas expected. "Is it okay if I call you something else too?" Jonas's chest went still. "What's that?" Nathan shuffled closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Pa?" Jonas's breath caught. He didn't answer. He just reached out and pulled the boy into a fierce hug. Nathan's small arms wrapped tight around him, and for the first time, Jonas didn't fight the warmth flooding his chest. From the doorway, Eliza watched, unseen but smiling, her hand pressed to her heart. Outside, the last chill of winter faded into the dark. Inside, the word home settled deep into the wood and the warmth of those who now filled it. Spring had fully arrived. The creek sang brighter each morning, its icy chains long gone. Buds bloomed bold on the trees and grass reached eagerly toward the sun. Yet winter's ghost had one more step to take, returning not as snow or storm, but as hoofbeats. Jonas knew the sound before he saw the rider crest the ridge. Matthew Crowley. This time, he rode alone. No hired guns, no crooked lawmen, just a man stripped bare, his fine coat dulled with dust and defeat. Jonas stood on the porch, hands calm at his sides. The cabin door behind him stood open, Eliza visible within, unshaken. Nathan, Laya, and Ben stood beside her, heads high. Their fear was gone. This was their home now. Matthew stopped his horse and dismounted slowly. His boots dragged through the mud, lacking the swagger they once held. Jonas said nothing. He didn't need to. "I came for them," Matthew said, his voice rough, uncertain. Jonas's eyebrow lifted. "Last I saw, the court made that decision for you." Matthew sneered weakly. "Courts change. So do people," Jonas replied, calm but sharp. Matthew's eyes flicked toward Eliza. His jaw clenched, but no fire remained. "What is this?" he spat bitterly. "You play house with my wife, raise my kids like they're yours." Eliza stepped forward, her voice steady as steel. "They were never yours, Matthew. You gave them nothing but fear. You left us to die. Jonas gave them something you never could." Matthew scoffed, but the sound rang hollow. "I was their blood." "Blood?" Jonas said, his voice hardening. "Blood doesn't keep them warm. Doesn't fix toys or split wood or teach a boy how to stand tall. Blood didn't help Leia learn to read or make Ben laugh again." Each word struck Matthew harder than a blow. Behind Jonas, Nathan spoke, voice small but steady. "You're not our pa," he said. Laya added, "Jonas is." Even little Ben nodded, clutching his sister's skirt. Matthew's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of what he'd lost. He looked at Eliza one last time, something flickering in his eyes, maybe regret, maybe nothing at all. Without a word, he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away. He didn't look back. This time it felt final. The last snow had melted. That evening, the cabin glowed warmer than ever. Jonas sat by the hearth, carving quietly as the children played. Eliza stirred stew at the stove, her hair loose and soft around her shoulders. No storms left outside, none within. When dinner was done and the children tucked away, Eliza crossed the room to where Jonas sat. Her eyes, once cautious, now brimmed with certainty. "I meant what I said," she whispered. Jonas tilted his head. "That this is home?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, but not because of the walls. Because of you. You held us up when the world pushed us down. You stayed." Jonas rose slowly, taking her hands, rough palms meeting gentle ones like they'd always belonged. "I didn't know how much I needed you," he said softly. "All of you. You have us now," Eliza whispered. "If you want us," Jonas smiled, rare and true. "I want everything that comes through that door every morning. Even the noise." Eliza laughed quietly, then leaned up, pressing her lips to his. No rush, no grand gesture, just belonging. When they parted, she rested her head against his chest. "I used to wonder," she murmured, "if I'd ever feel safe again." Jonas's arm tightened around her. "You're safe," he promised. "Always." Outside, Winter melted into soft, breathing earth, inside, beside the fire. A man who had once been hollow and a woman who had once been broken stood bound, not by chance but by choice. Love here wasn't loud. It was carved slow, like wood, like trust, and as night settled gently over their home, Eliza whispered, "We're not surviving anymore. Jonas, we're living." And for the first time in his life, Jonas Hale believed her. Not every family is born. Some are built, fought for, carved by hand, and held together by choice.